Now, I was reading recently that such kind of financial instruments like derivatives account for 11 times the global GDP. And we are not talking about tangible products. We're talking here about numbers in computers, about movement of money, and in no way true production, investment. Not that. We're talking about movement of funds between groups. And obviously that is a big time bomb, because quite often all these, let's call them papers, are not backed by any product of value. Or if they are, it's a very small percentage. Now, this has led to global instability that has affected many economies, including the Greek economy. And unfortunately, I can't see any international community, which I fear does not really exist, and I would go as far to say as no European Union really even exists, that will somehow limit the anarchy of these markets and set some rules that will protect the markets from this instability that these financial institutions and their products cause. I find it almost insane that there are financial instruments that bet on the failure of a country. Greece is having huge troubles from such kind of instruments currently, because believe it or not, there are bets on the failure of this economy, on Greece defaulting, on, for an example, the increase of the government debt. And one wonders how the people that have these holdings, which are quite influential, and in many cases they are corporations and even governments, how these conflicting interests can exist in what someone would think is an alliance or a European Union, when a certain party is going to benefit from the failure of a country. To me, that doesn't sound only irrational, but it sounds quite unfriendly, and I would say that these so-called financial instruments seem to be more like a form of economic warfare. So, I think it's very important for a form of financial reform to begin. And I'm not seeing that happening. But it's necessary, because this thing is a time bomb that's already exploded and will explode in the future, but in a greater magnitude. And I think we can all see that in other phases of our economies, where, for an example, dividends. Many corporations say that they're not willing to give dividends under the excuse that they're going to reinvest that amount of money again into the company to help it develop. Of course, that's become an excuse. And we're seeing our economy slowly veering from investment logic and production to the movement of capital, and basing themselves on pieces of paper and numbers and computers, which of course cause this unstable environment. Now, concerning Greece, I believe the best thing the Greek government could do would be to exit the euro and bring back the drachma, because as a small country with so many problems, not being able to control your fiscal policy and not having a national currency that you can essentially undervalue and deflate and use to rejuvenate the economy, we're going nowhere. Currently, the IMF and our European partners are asking for even more intense austerity measures and harsher taxes. And in Greece, the taxes are getting so high, and there's so many cuts in wages, and there's so many people being sacked and losing their jobs, that the pool of taxable capital, let's say, is becoming smaller and smaller. So even though the taxes are increasing, the government is getting even less revenues than it did last year, and even more less than from the year before. So obviously, I believe that the road we're heading towards is incorrect. It's not going to lead us anywhere good, and quite frankly, I can't see the Greek economy surviving. And I'm very much so surprised to see analysts from financial institutions and the IMF insisting on these measures, when obviously the probability of the lenders to being repaid is becoming less and less. So, under having a realistic view of the situation in this country, I believe that part of the debt needs to be written off and erased, and I find that only fair, taking into account that a big part of the debt was created through fraudulent activity and corrupt deals. And it's only fair for the Greek people that are actually now paying the burden of this financial crisis to have part of that debt written off. And that would also help any government to have more realistic objectives. And by also reverting back to the drachma, we could rejuvenate the economy, create jobs, create more employment in order to have a greater tax base to draw funds in order to repay our lenders. So if our lenders are interested in receiving their money back, they should definitely take into account the reality I just presented. Now, I would like to also mention that here in Greece, my generation is what we call the lost generation. Most of my friends are unemployed. Several others that are employed are receiving very low wages, and some of them are working in big corporations that we all know, and have pretty good positions, and still they have wages of 700, 800, and 900 euros a month, which is of course a very small income, taking into account that the cost of living in Greece is one of the highest in Europe. And that is also tied again to several European corporations that function within Greece, but due to their monopolistic and in some cases oligopolistic and in some cases monopolistic position, they use that leverage in the market to have increased prices, which in turn is also causing inflation. And for an example, like simple products like milk are quite cheaper in other European countries, but when they're provided through a multinational supermarket in Greece, they're more expensive, much more expensive. So the problem is quite complicated, and I believe that I'm giving it a solution to it by suggesting the return to the drachma, but I also feel that an international reform is also quite necessary. The way the markets are functioning, we are really going towards a dead end, and this crazy obsession that Europe has with monetarism, with keeping a very strong currency, is really not helping anybody. For an example, other countries like England or the United States, which have their own currency, are in a much better position because they can do their fiscal policy and have a measure of control over the economy, even though England, quite interestingly, is their public and private debt combined is actually analogically larger than the one of Greece. But those countries are having a less effect of the economic crisis, the global one, because they do have that ability in their government. I hope I've been informative concerning Greece, and I wish you a good day or a good night.